One of the most common questions I get about astrophotography is whether or not people need to get light pollution filters. And since I spend most of the year traveling to the darkest skies in the country, this isn't something I usually have to worry about. But when I'm in Ohio for the winter and trying to do some deep space work, it's definitely a concern because we've got a lot of light pollution back east. So in this video, I'm going to be looking at two different light pollution filters and seeing if they're worth the investment or not. We've got the UHC and the L Pro, both from Optolong. And I want to thank Mike from Orange County Telescope. When I was traveling through California, he was kind enough to provide me with both filters, and we got to talk a lot about different telescopes and cameras and things like that. So if you ever have any questions at all about maybe investing in a telescope or a CCD type camera, or maybe a new mount, definitely check with Mike or Kenny over at Orange County Telescopes. They're both really knowledgeable and good people. Kenny is really, I worked with him in 2018 and he's a wizard with telescopes. So if you want to learn more about that kind of stuff, definitely check them out. I'll have a link to Orange County Telescope in the description, but again, thanks to Mike for both of these filters. So today we're going to be looking at both and seeing just how well they actually work for wide angle and deep space and all that. And then we'll do a final analysis and see if it's worth the investment. So the first thing we have to talk about is the fact that these are clip-in filters. And that's a bit different from anything I've ever used before. I'm used to screwing the filters on the front of the lens or sliding them in if they're kind of the big rectangular filters or squares. But this is just a little clip-in filter, and it's going to go right next to your sensor. So it's kind of scary the first time you do it, and it's going to change things a little bit, but it's really not a big deal. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to actually install these properly so you don't damage anything, and then we'll go on from there.
All right, so here we have the UHC filter, which I'm going to install to my Nikon D750. And to be clear, these filters are for specific cameras. Some cameras might not work. So head over to my website. I'll have a link for that in the description for more information. But basically what we're going to be doing is using live view to flip that mirror up and then install the filter. So the first thing you want to do is turn on your camera and then turn on live view. For me, it's right here. For some of you, it might be on the top of your camera. But once you turn on live view, the mirror is going to flip out of the way, and now your sensor is visible. So you kind of want to do this pretty quickly because otherwise dust is going to fall in there, and you don't want to do this outside if you're in the desert or something like that. So that's one of the scary parts about doing this initially, is that your sensor is going to be exposed. So turn on live view. Your mirror is going to flip out of the way. Now you can grab your clip-in filter, and very simply, we're just going to drop it down in there. So in this case, the Optolong logo is up top, UHC is at the bottom, and it should just fit in there very nicely. Once you've made sure it's set in there, you can turn off live view. And if you do everything properly, when you turn off live view, you'll see that switch move inside the camera, but the mirror didn't come down and everything didn't break. Again, if you're not using the correct camera and you try and put this in the wrong camera, this could have really bad consequences. So make sure you verify that these filters are compatible with your camera before you buy them. And we can see the filter is now working and everything works fine. Now I can grab my lens, attach it to the camera, and then start shooting. But you want to make sure that you do this whole process as quickly as possible, that we don't have more dust falling in there. And now if I turn on live view and take off the lens cap, we can see there's our image. Everything's working properly. There's a bit of a purple color cast because this is the UHC filter, but the camera should work as normal now. You'll just be getting less light. To take off the filter, first thing you need to do, of course, is take off the lens. Once you've taken off the lens, we're pretty much just going to reverse the process. So pull that off of there. Now what we need to do is turn live view back on. Once you turn on live view, that mirror, well, it's already out of the way, but it's going to pretend to flip out of the way, if you will. And very simply, all you have to do is reach your finger in there. There's almost like a little clip or a notch at the top of the filter. You should be able to reach it with your nail, and then you can pull it right up out of the camera. This might give you a bit of a struggle the first few times you do it, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. Then you can put the filter in there, and you want to quickly turn off live view once it's out of there. That way the mirror comes down, and you don't have dust just pouring into your camera. But pretty simply, that's how you'll install your clip-in filters.
All right, now that you've seen how to properly install the clip-in filters, it's really not a big deal after you've done it one or two times. The only thing I'd caution you on is that if you're in a dusty environment, and I very often am out in the desert, you want to make sure that you really do that very quickly or go inside your car or something, because the longer your sensor is exposed to dust, that's going to give you some problems, and it's just going to mean you're going to have to clean your sensor more often, which you don't really want to do. So that's the first problem I have with the clip-ins, is that you got to really watch the sensor. However, you can use these filters with all of your lenses now, because you don't have a filter to screw in or attach or anything to the front. So this will make things easier in the long run, all things considered. That's the first thing. Now let's look at how well these filters actually perform in various environments.
In this first test, we're going to see how the light pollution filters work with a wide-angle lens in LA, which has some of the worst light pollution on the planet. And before we go any further, I want to mention that all of these raw files we're going to be looking at are available over on my website. I'll have a link for that in the description. But if you want to get a closer look and mess around with these yourselves, you're more than welcome to do that. So links for that in the description. Here's our first image though, taken in LA with the Nikon 14-24, f2.8, 15-second shutter speed, ISO 100. That should give you a red flag right there. If I'm shooting at ISO 100 and we can still see a lot of light, that's kind of scary, just how much light pollution there is. Again, this is no filter. All of these photos were taken with the same settings, same white balance. So this is our no filter. Next we have the L Pro. The color balance looks a lot better, and there's noticeably less light pollution. Finally, we have the UHC filter. It's even darker, and there's kind of a purplish color balance, which I think looks kind of cool. But if we compare that again directly with the no filter, noticeably darker. Now what I'm going to do is increase the exposure to kind of mimic what most people would see. We'll go up, let's say 2 stops right now. That's like going to ISO 400 or so. And there's a lot of light pollution reaching up into the sky. If we sync those settings though with both of our filtered images, we can get a look at how that's going to work. So this is no filter versus the L Pro. It's noticeably less light pollution. And I can actually very vaguely make out the Milky Way now. You can see the Lagoon Nebula right here and part of the core there, which you'd never probably notice in a light polluted image. I mean, unless you really know what you're looking at, I can barely see it here. But that would be the first thing I would say, is that these aren't miracle cures. They're not going to magically make the Milky Way show up if you're in LA, but it can definitely help. And here's the UHC version. The UHC filter is going to be blocking a lot of light, so I really have to increase this even more, probably 3 or 4 stops to get a comparable image compared to the no filter. And that's kind of what we want, right? Is we want to capture less of this light pollution, but overall it tends to darken the image quite substantially. But now I can even see a little bit more of the Milky Way. So I think these photos here show a good idea of what you can expect if you're shooting in the city. And that would be my first thing, is that even if you get these filters, you want to get out to the suburbs at least, if not out into the country, if at all possible. Now that we've seen how these filters perform from a wide point of view, I want to zoom in and take a look at some of the problems I noticed. So let's start by going back to the no light pollution filter image. And every time I focused on Jupiter here, so I made sure that was as small as possible using live view. And if I go over to the corners of the image now, we'll go to the bottom left. That should show everything pretty clearly. The lights here, there's a little bit of coma due to the lens I was using. And if we look at the stars, there's a little bit of movement to them, even at 15 seconds. You could argue that's distortion. But that's how the stars look with no filter. And also, again, the lights down here. There's a little bit of distortion, but nothing major. Whenever I attached the filters, though, I noticed that things were quite a bit worse. This is with the UHC filter. And see how the light just never focuses properly here in the corners? It's just really bad. But if we go to the center of the image, things start to get much better and sharper. And if we look at Jupiter, which was our focusing point, Jupiter's nice and small and round. And that just goes to show you that if you're going to be using a wide angle lens, the stars in the center of the image will be sharp, but anything in the corners is just going to be completely thrown out of focus due to these filters. Same thing with the UHC. If I were to zoom in, and we'll go down to the corner here, and you'll see that here as well, just like the UHC, that all the lights have been distorted due to that filter. So that's another problem with using these filters with wide angle lenses. But Next, we're going to look at how these filters perform under a dark sky. So for these shots, I went out to the Alabama Hills in the eastern Sierras of California. This was 15 seconds, ISO 3200 now, same camera, same lens, no filter for this first shot. Next, we have the L Pro. It's a little bit darker. It's noticeably cooler, even though it's the same exact white balance. We'll go back to the no filtered and compare that directly against the UHC. And now you can barely even see the Milky Way because the UHC is blocking so much light. Now what I want to do is actually brighten things up so you can see a little bit better and increase the saturation. So this is the no filtered option, kind of your standard colors at night if you're on daylight anyway. We have a yellowish, greenish color cast to the sky, and since it was only 15 seconds, things don't look very good. But if we compare that now with the L Pro image, I'm going to sync all the settings. Here's the L Pro, same exact setting. It's noticeably cooler, a little bit darker, and bluer. Now I can try and fix that here in post just by adjusting some of these settings. But when I do that, things still don't look great. And we're starting to get some color model now that's more visible. And of course, the stars in the corners are completely out of focus. If I apply these same edits now from the no filtered image to the UHC photo and then compare them, the UHC filter is noticeably darker, has a very heavy purple color cast. I have to increase it even more. Now we're seeing this color modeling, a lot of this amp glow. And you might be thinking, why would you even use these filters if there's no light pollution? But I wanted to see what would happen. And I think this clearly demonstrates why you don't want to use them in a dark sky with a wide angle lens and no star tracker. Again, if I could shoot 4 or 5 minutes, this wouldn't be nearly as bad because I'm capturing a lot more light. But if you're just out there with a tripod and 15, 20-second exposures, I do not recommend using these filters whatsoever, especially considering that star distortion once again. That's the UHC. Here's just the no filter, much, much sharper. That's our first round of tests. Next, we're going to look at how these filters perform with a telephoto lens, which is probably what most people want to use them for. This next round of tests was taken in Stevenson, Washington, which is right along the Columbia River Gorge. There's a fair amount of light pollution. It's nothing bad, though. This is our raw photo. This is now 300 seconds, taken with my star tracker, Tamron 7200, ISO 400, f2.8. So this is kind of what most people are going to be using these filters for, I'm assuming. And if we zoom in right out of the gate, again, there's a little bit of star distortion with no filter whatsoever. And what you'll see if we use the L Pro or the UHC is that there's no noticeable star distortion. So I want to make everybody clear on that. Those problems we were seeing at the wide angle are not applicable if you're going to be using a telephoto lens. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can kind of see the North American Nebula here with no filter, but the L Pro, the photo is noticeably darker, and I can definitely see the North American Nebula quite a bit better than I could before. And if we go back to the no filter and compare that now with the UHC, I can really start to see that nebula even though it's a bit darker. So why don't we increase the exposure and look at that. Not only do you see the nebula up here, there's some faint areas that we never probably would have noticed otherwise. And I'm noticing a lot of great detail now here in the nebula. So this was really when I started to realize just how cool these filters can be if they're used in the right context. So if I apply these same edits now to the raw photo with no filter, yeah, look at that. I mean, that's also because that filter is much darker, so I'll turn it down a little bit. But still, we can barely make out that nebula without the filter. And I can try and even screw with the image, and it's just still very hard to make out that nebula with no filter at all. It's there, but it doesn't look great, especially when compared to the UHC. That's really where this filter stands out, is when you have a lot of H-alpha and some of those colors. Now let's apply these same edits here to the L Pro. And the problem we have here is that the color balance, I think, is too blue. So I'm going to manually adjust the white balance, and there we go. It instantly pops out at us, and I think that looks a lot better. And I can mess with some of these settings. So this just goes to show you, if you're in a moderately light polluted area and using either the L Pro or the UHC, it's going to make a surprising difference. And to be honest, like I said, I was really blown away when I did these tests. I did not expect them both to perform that well. Of course, the problem you're going to have, especially with the UHC, is that this white balance is completely whacked out, and you really have to know how to edit your images, especially using curves. And that's something I cover in my various courses. I can't really get into it today just due to time, but you can really have a big impact using curves on your photos. So if you want to learn more, head over to my website, check out my deep space course. This is our first round of tests. Now we're going to look at how these filters perform with the Lagoon Nebula in a more light polluted area. All right, here's our last round of tests. This is Lagoon Nebula. In this case, f6, 300 seconds, ISO 200. These were taken in Port Angeles, Washington, which if you were to look at it on a light pollution map, has a fair amount of light pollution. This is kind of what I would expect most people are going to have around the country and around the world. If I increase the exposure here with the no filter, we can kind of see the nebula there, especially the core and the trifid there. It looks okay, and I'll put it back to default. That's the raw photo there compared to the L Pro. L Pro, again, is noticeably darker and cooler, and the raw photo compared to the UHC, which is even darker and more purple. So I'm going to increase the exposure here on the UHC filter, and look at that. It really starts to come out nicely now. And we have that really heavy purple-blue color cast. We can fix that pretty well, but look how well the nebula stands out, especially the fainter areas that would otherwise not even really be visible here on the normal image. It's just kind of hidden there, but it really pops out beautifully with the UHC. And if we apply these same settings now to the L Pro, we'll see how that one looks. In this case, we had this tree that got in the way. I was shooting in a parking lot again of a library, so disregard the giant orange blob there, but I will increase the exposure a bit more. And if I adjust the white balance, that nebula is really going to stand out better now. So again, there's that versus the no filter versus the UHC. So based on these tests, I would say the UHC is a fantastic option if you want to do nebula photography. The only problem, again, you're going to have to really work that white balance to get rid of that tint. And mainly, you're going to have to use curves in Photoshop to get rid of that as effectively as possible. And the L Pro, though, you're not going to have anywhere near the color cast. You'll have a much easier time removing it. You're going to have more natural colors. So overall, I think it'll make your life easier if you have the L Pro. But either one should do much better than no filter at all. And again, I want to stress just how surprised I was. I honestly thought these filters were kind of gimmicky. I didn't think they'd work this well. But having tested them now on multiple different nights in multiple different locations, as we've all seen, they actually do a good job of bringing out those nebula even more.
Well, now that we've seen how the filters perform in a variety of different testing environments, let's recap everything we talked about and see if these are actually worth it. So we looked at the Optolong UHC and the L Pro filters. These are clip-in my case for the Nikon full frame. A little bit scary to install them, but really not a big deal after you've done it once or twice. The only concern there is getting dust in your sensor while it's exposed. That's the first problem. Second is that if you're going to be going out to a fairly dark sky, these really aren't necessary. It's only going to be if you're shooting kind of like in a suburban area, you're going to get the best possible results with these rather than an extremely light polluted area. Just drive outside the city a little bit. And the UHC, going to have a very heavy color cast, red and blue. It's going to darken the image quite a bit. However, if you're just photographing the Lagoon Nebula, the Orion Nebula, North American Nebula, anything that's red and blue or just red, this filter is going to be okay because those are the only colors coming from that nebula anyway. It's not going to hurt things. However, if you're going to be photographing like the Andromeda Galaxy as well as the other nebulas or maybe the Milky Way up close, the L Pro might well be a better option for you. It's going to be much more targeted and precise with its light pollution removal without removing all the other wavelengths. So you're going to get more light with this filter, more neutral color cast, and overall this is kind of the premier filter, at least of these two. So my final recommendation would be if you normally shoot in a suburban area and you're doing deep space astrophotography with your telephoto lens or a telescope, I would definitely recommend getting either the UHC or the L Pro depending on the main objects you want to photograph and your budget. The L Pro is quite a bit more expensive, but it's also overall a higher quality filter. And I don't really have any reservations about the fact that they're clip-ins. We've discussed the problem with that. Really not a big deal though. It's better than having to buy a bunch of filters you screw on and things like that. And if you're just going to be photographing different nebula and you're in a pretty light polluted area, the UHC isn't a bad bet either. for quite a bit cheaper than the L Pro. At the end of the day though, you do need to know how to edit your photos. That's always going to be key. And if you get my deep space course in particular, we cover a bunch of different ways where you can remove a very extreme color cast just using Photoshop. Again, the problem you have with light pollution is kind of twofold. The first is that there's more light obscuring the nebular galaxy. The second is the color cast. And the color cast we can fix pretty easily in post-processing, but if you've got a lot of light pollution obscuring your objects, that's when you really want to look into getting the light pollution filters. So before we go, I wanted to reiterate, if you're interested in either of these filters, especially the L Pro, Mike over at Orange County Telescope was generous enough to give me a discount code for all of you guys. So you can save 5% on your order right now. If you want to do that, I'll have a link in the description so you can head over to Orange County Telescope and pick up either filter, save 5%. I'll have the coupon code there as well. And I think you guys will really enjoy it, especially if you're just shooting in a suburban area. It should make things easier for you.
And one final plug before we go, I am going to be teaching a deep space workshop in Florida this November. So if you want to come down, this is going to be an all-inclusive workshop. We're going to teach you how I capture these photos out in the field. You're going to learn everything I know about processing and setting up your star tracker, how to use your telephoto lens. If you want to learn more, I'll have a link for this in the description as well. We have only a few spots left though. There's only going to be 6 students total. So reserve your spot today if you're interested. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and maybe I'll catch you out under the stars in Florida this November.